my city. The city you see on your big screen is the city I see on mine. But the city you see on your big screen isn't all there is to see of my city. This is Ibrahim Chavez, inspired by Angelino James Elroy's LA Quartet, doing for the month of December my LA Quintet. And tonight on Watch This with RickRamos, we're going to talk about how many people get their first taste of the City of Angels through cinema, Hollywood, with Thom Andersen's 2003 video essay, Los Angeles Plays Itself.
You know, it's remarkable the power of cinema and how it it can determine, and it can paint the picture of what people see a place to be, a people to be, a culture, both the city's culture and the culture that lives within it. And Los Angeles Plays Itself is a film that has been, I guess it's been floating around the world of movie lovers for the last 20 some odd years. It was a film that was started, I believe, as some kind of a graduate program thesis essay of some sort, and Thom Andersen, an educator, a scholar. I'm not sure if he was a student then, if he's a professor now. I'm not sure what the background of that is, but it garnered a lot. It garnered a whole lot of attention in the movie-loving public of Los Angeles. I don't know how this film would do outside of Los Angeles, but inside of Los Angeles, it was a very famous film that was unable to get distribution because Anderson had made a film that used a number of different scenes and clips from various movies centered in and around LA, some New York, but for the most part Los Angeles, or places that Los Angeles stood in for, like Switzerland, China, and Chicago. Hilariously badly done in some cases. But the film was caught up in legal problems because there was never an attempt on the filmmakers. It never seemed to occur to the filmmaker that he should get rights and pay for the use of these clips. So for the longest time, for something like a decade and a half, this film floated around Los Angeles, being screened occasionally at the American Cinematheque, at the Aero Theater, the Egyptian Theater, and later on, eventually, the legal issues were handled, the rights issues were handled, and it got a belated release on DVD. I don't know if it's ever been released on Blu-ray. I had never seen it until I had wanted to see it for a number of years in LA. Never had the chance. Something always came up. Work was always a problem. But I finally got to see this film because of Mr. Chavez, and this month dedicated to his love of his city. So you can watch it for free on YouTube. Just punch in Los Angeles Plays Itself, and I'm sure a couple of different sites will come up. There is one that there are no commercials, no breaks. You could just watch it from beginning to the end of 2 hours and 50 some odd minutes. So that's the film this is a film that we're introducing for Mr. Chavez's month, and I'm really interested in what your take on it, because you are an LA born and raised, living your entire life in LA and the surrounding areas. I was an LA transplant for 20 years. I have a somewhat different take on it, but I also have a film lover's and a film watcher's take on it. I'm really interested what you thought, what was good about the film, what was bad about the film, what did it get right, what did it get wrong, and what was your impression of it?
Well, and I'm curious to hear your opinions as And even if you consider yourself, do you consider yourself an Angelino? Like I consider myself an Angelino, but even when I say that, it's like, well, what does that fucking mean? Because there are, and we'll get into this when we actually get through some of the many points that he brings up in this fucking 3 hour long video essay. But
well, when you say that, like I'm a born and raised Phoenician, Phoenix, Arizona, up until the age of 17, college for 4 years, 3 or 4 years back in Arizona. But the bulk of my young adult life, from 25 to 46, was spent in Los Angeles, Torrance, West LA, just outside of Koreatown, and finally into South Pasadena. I worked in the Valley. Plus, I was a school teacher, so I worked in the Valley, Santa Monica, in the Hollywood area, Watts, a couple of times in Compton, South Central, and East LA. So
you got a good taste.
yeah, I got a pretty good handle of that city and what it is and what it was about. The cultural diversity, the cultural segregation, the food, the different types of entertainment and lifestyles out there. And there's a part of me that is an Angelino and will always be an Angelino because of my time spent there. So, I don't know. It's a weird thing to talk about because a lot of people are very protective of that shit. Because some people will say, "Well, you're not really an Angelino. You didn't grow up. You didn't grow up in Los Angeles." And I will say that that's true. But some of the best years of my life were spent there, and specifically the Sunset Strip, Hollywood, the Comedy Store, the outlying comedy clubs, bars and clubs all over town, the Long Beach area, everything. Yeah, we spent a lot of time downtown, a lot in a lot of areas that some people wouldn't go to. And over 20 years, we saw major changes in downtown. So it's really interesting to watch this film and see the life of Los Angeles as it's chronicled from the Max Sennett era of the Keystone Cops of the late 1910s and the early 20s up until the early 2000s, and then even our experiences in watching movies since that time, and films that have been shot in and around LA, including Nicholas Winding Refn's Drive, and a handful of other films that just it's a weird kind of cinema is a weird kind of time capsule that takes you back to different places and not just different times. It's an entirely different place. It's not the I'm assuming that the Los Angeles of the 70s and the 80s, the 90s and the 2000s when I was there were completely different. I mean, I see that having left Phoenix for 20 years and coming back to it. A lot of it is similar, but it's a completely different. It's like it's like leaving a pot on a stove. It's going to taste different after a while. Everything's gonna bleed into everything else, and you're going to add things to it, and it's going to become a different kind of. It's going to be a different dish, and that's one of the things that I do like about this film. But you, as a born and raised Angelino, what is your opinion on that? On this film?
I thought it was great because it's great to see this like.
Mm-hmm.
The question of like Angelino, it's weird because it's almost because there are many Los Angeles because it's so
wide,
it's so segregated and so separated and so sprawled out.
And believe me, when we say segregated, we're not saying that in any kind of judgmental way. We're just pointing out a fact of where people live and how.
I mean, and there is judgment there because I mean that's what it is. It's also like that's kind of what that's the freeways. That's the and the West Side is like the fucking West Side. Whereas someone else is gonna say like, oh, that's fucking like now it's South LA, but before it was like South Central LA. You know what I mean? And And it used to be, well, what was your fucking area code? Was it 213 or whatever the fuck? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you know,
Cell phones
and
changed all of that, so it's like an area code
even
really did
fucking the gang
define
shit.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, an area code really did define you. Your zip code, your fucking Beverly Hills 90210,
Hmm.
or were you fucking whatever the fuck? You know what I mean? And so in a sense, it kind of like it touches on one of his first like big segments in the documentary, and I'm still getting to my opinion of it. Is like the city as background.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, this film is broken up into three different compartmentalized, it not compartmentalized, but it's three different
like parts.
parts: L.A. as plot, L.A. as background, L.A. as character.
So character, well, I think it's background, character, and subject.
Yeah, is it? Yeah, background, character, and subject. Yeah.
And I don't think that it's like, oh, this is what Thom Andersen got right. This is what Thom Andersen got wrong. I just think that it's his video essay, and he's making these points. And as an Angelino, he himself has these strong opinions of what it is. And the number one thing off the bat is a distaste for the abbreviation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not LA. To Thom Andersen, it's Los Angeles. And so I'm not gonna fucking sit here over the course of 2.5 hours or however long this episode is gonna be, talking about a 3-hour fucking video essay documentary where every reference I make to my city is gonna be Los Angeles this and Los Angeles that and Los Angeles this. It's fucking LA.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't give a fuck if he cringes about it. I don't care. That's his opinion. That he can have that. That's cool. But I don't. He attributes that to a type of inferiority complex, and we'll get to that through Hollywood, the industry. And I like that he has these big, like, bold kind of views. I worked for a long time with a client of mine who was an LA historian who had similar views and about certain things, and was also like, as Thom Andersen says, Hollywood is. He was into architecture, so he was like anti-modernist architecture, and he hated the fucking Walt Disney Concert Hall. Like, he hated fucking Walt Disney Concert Hall. And
you should describe to people what that is, though. I mean, because there's the
Walt Disney Concert Hall. If you don't know what it looks like, it's like, get a piece of tinfoil and
yeah,
ball it up.
And then take scissors to it and have it like a feathered hairdo that can't control itself. It's like parts of that are going all over the place. In some ways it's a very ugly building, but in other ways it's a fascinating building. It makes a statement. At the very least, it does make a statement. I'll give it that. But
it's recognizable.
Yeah. But that's part of the thing about LA, though, is that you have so much modern sitting next to so much classical, and it kind of
and Art Deco and all this other shit.
Yeah, they start to blend in. They affect each other in bad ways, I think, because there's no I don't know, there's no uniformity of style, of class. It's like, but like how many Bradbury buildings can you have? You know what I mean? Because
that's the thing.
That's the thing. Yeah, it's its own singular, unique thing, and and part of its power is that there's nothing else out there like it, and you have to go inside the building to experience that.
Right, and if you can't go inside the building, a movie can't.
Yeah,
a movie can take you there, and so Thom Andersen, he describes Los Angeles as the most photographed city in the world, because of the amount of film. He describes it as the most photographed but the least photogenic, and he mentions other big cities that Paris and New York and cities that, to Thom Andersen, the shots you see in a lot of films are always or oftentimes in focus. There's something about LA and its smogginess that makes everything fuzzy and somehow distant.
Yeah.
And to him, there's reality, and then there's the representation of reality that we get through cinema. And the way that affects LA is that in LA places, like you said, the Bradbury Building, or you have the Walt Disney Concert Hall, as I'm describing, you have landmarks and you have movie locations. And many of the landmarks are landmarks because they're movie locations. So if you think of places that you can think of, and I'll run through some of them that he talks about in a little while. It's because if you haven't been there, you've been there at the movies.
Yeah.
To Andersen, LA it's not really a place. It's like a background. It's not a city. It's a backdrop that could play, as you described, it can play almost any other city, and it has. And it's a place where, at least in Hollywood, characters don't really live, they only visit. And if they do live, they either live at the beach in movies,
mm-hmm.
or they live in the Hollywood Hills. And if they're a villain, they live in some modernist fucking house. That for whatever reason, Andersen thinks that directors hate, so they put them in those buildings.
Andersen did quite a bit of layering his own opinions of, and it's his film. He could do what he wants to do with it, but
yeah, it's his essay.
Yeah, but I found it. One of the things that I found difficult. See, I really like this film. I really enjoyed watching this film, but I don't think it's as. I don't think it's as successful at getting across what its idea was as he would have liked to have achieved. I think there's number one. I think he's trying to do too many things in one movie. Each one of those elements of LA as background, as LA as character, and LA as, what was the last one? Subject. Each one of those looks or examinations, focused examination on LA could easily fill the time that he uses in this documentary. Or you would need a better filmmaker to really pull all of those ideas together. Part of the problem that I felt with the film is, although I enjoyed it and I'm glad I watched it and I would like to watch it again, is I go into it already falling in love with the concept of what is being done and the use of clips. So I'm enjoying watching films as they're depicted. The film, because, yes, this is Thom Andersen's film, but this is also every other director that is contributing with not by choice, but is contributing through their clips. There's Soderbergh's The Limey, there's Gone in 60 Seconds, there's The Glimmer Man. There's Altman with Shortcuts and The Player. There's a number of different directors who have different takes. And he could have interviewed some of those directors, which might not have been good for this documentary. I would have enjoyed that. I don't know if it would have sold the documentary any better, but I think by not even attempting to cite interviews or other writings that directors have had concerning their films, I think he misses out on some of that. I think there's something lacking here, because I don't think he truly understands what each filmmaker was trying to do with the film. He's drawing conclusions about cinematic attitudes. Some of them are decent, where I'm not sure if every villain needs a house like that. I think the tropes of
he's not saying I don't think he's saying they need that. I think he's saying that it seems to be that that's what the way that Hollywood portrays them is it puts them
Exactly,
in these
and
modern
that's what I
components.
was
Yeah.
getting at, where it's kind of a shorthand to showing wealth and a certain level of a certain level of veiled depravity, you know. So these are respectable people of a certain ilk who are living high and mighty in the Hollywood Hills or at the beach. You know, the Hollywood Hills is your murderers, your killers, your heads of corporations that are taking advantage. The beach somehow is your your recent arrivals to LA, your rogue cops like Stallone and Cobra. When both of those, you know, when the reality of anybody living at the beach, I think he said something like about a $2,500 rental. No, in heat to live even in a fixer upper above sunset. Um, that's going to cost you anywhere from $25 to $3,000 a month, and no bookstore clerk is going to be able to afford that, which is absolutely true. I
Right.
mean, the ideas behind some of these things that we're told in films are ridiculous. They're ludicrous. They're just they're. It's impossible to imagine that people are able to live in this manner on minimum wage jobs, but that's that's been the standard in everything that we watch. I mean, how the hell are you know six people supposed to live in these beautiful lofts in L.A. like in New York, like on Friends or any other show where people are simply living above their means. It's the cinematic dream factory. It's this idea of creating something that's not necessarily honest or truthful, but is
Yeah, it's reality versus representation.
yeah, yeah. So
Um, I'm glad that he didn't do that because I think it would have broken up the rhythm.
what the interviewing
I like,
directors? You mean or what?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, and um,
I lost you
and
for a second there. What happened?
I said to have interviewed them, I think would have been a different project.
Yeah,
Um, and I kind of like the fact that there's this just in a sense, and we'll get to the noir aspect in a little bit, but
hmm
in a sense that it's almost this noir kind of cynical view of Hollywood, the industry,
yeah,
that he takes, and it's just a narrator with clips talking, like criticizing the Hollywood industry for the way that it represents his city. Because um, it's almost like some guy with a trench coat walking through downtown in the night, saying they took my lady and they made her a whore. You know what I mean? And um, that's what he's basically saying. And he's basically saying all this shit that you see in the movies about LA, that's not LA. I'm gonna show you what you think is LA, but I'm gonna tell you that that's not what you fucking think. And I'm gonna show you all of these looks about Los Angeles over the history of cinema, but I'm gonna also kind of coolly in a critical way rage at the fucking at this industry that will even go as far as to fucking truncate the name of my city and abbreviate it into LA. So it's kind of like it's this interesting homage to Los Angeles
hmm
and homage to Hollywood while at the same time saying fuck you to Hollywood.
yeah,
So I just think that in itself is cool. And so he goes on and then he starts to, the idea of the title is that like some of these landmarks become fill-ins for other things, but sometimes they play themselves in cinema And to an Angelino, they also play themselves because we know these buildings. And a lot of times it's a mixture of through cinema and seeing them on the street. Because if you really break it down, there isn't a lot of variety in terms of types of films about LA. A lot of times they're going to be it's about the industry.
Yeah.
It's about police or crime, with not that much else. There are variations, but it's and we'll get into that. But he brings up some of these landmarks. Think about, as those of you who are listening, think about what, if you haven't been to LA, what have you seen in film that you think means, what are those images that mean LA? And even if you visited, it's like, what were those landmarks? What were those places that made you think of LA, even if you didn't want to see them, or if you did, what are those connections? City Hall is one that gets a lot of shots downtown, famous building. That's fucking, you think about police shit. The Chinese Theater in Hollywood, it was Grauman's and then Mann's and TCL. That gets a lot of like helicopter shots. It's right there on fucking Hollywood, Hollywood Boulevard. Another one, Griffith Park, the observatory, the planetarium.
Yeah.
Rebel Without a Cause. That's a big one that you can see on the hill, not too far from the Hollywood sign. The Hollywood sign itself is probably the biggest one. Not in terms of size, but just in terms of
world famous and the reputation and really
what it represents. Yeah.
Yeah.
To him, he says it marks it marks literally the ascendancy of Hollywood over the rest of Los Angeles. A decayed advertisement for a real estate development. And I mean, that is true. It is that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You get smaller, not smaller in terms of size, but things that maybe an Angelino will know, like the Bonaventure Hotel. That you'll see the interior in a movie, but you won't really know what it is.
Yeah.
But then you have like a Pink's Hot Dogs, which I think is incredibly fucking overrated. La Brea and Melrose. Overrated as fuck. The Coliseum, to a lesser extent. The 4-level freeway interchange. Because here it's not highways, they're freeways.
Yeah.
101 North is the Hollywood. 101 South is the Santa Ana. Going into the OC, which is another fucking animal. Well, then it's the 110 North, which is the Pasadena, and the 110 South, which is the Harbor, going to San Pedro. So it's like, there's a lot of variety here in LA. I would argue that also the Santa Monica Pier comes out in films a lot. Capitol Records building comes out. The Hollywood Walk of Fame. He talks about, the most interesting thing about that to me is that he describes it as a place where the Hollywood blacklist still lives.
I like that moment, but he didn't really see. Part of the problem was there's so much to talk about, and he touches on things. He doesn't
break it down,
but he doesn't dig deeper into things, and then he goes full on to certain things, and I feel like I'm watching a different movie. We're going to get to that, but his examination of Chinatown takes over the film, and the film becomes something different. So there was that where it was like, I was like, I'm watching a different fucking movie. This is not, and I'm fascinated by this. I'm really interested. I would love to see a documentary that parallels Polanski's film with the real life events that inspired it. That weren't dramatized, but inspired it.
Yeah,
I find that
and
interesting.
We're gonna talk about Chinatown soon.
Yes.
Soon enough. Outside of what we're doing here in December, but I'm also gonna come back to some of this.
Mhm.
So the really the in-depth stuff that he talks about, I'm gonna not talk about today.
No, because we will
Because I
get to
think,
it.
and it goes there. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a simple argument that he's making that we can touch on without going into that. But in terms of the Walk of Fame, he describes it as a place where the blacklist still exists, and he says with stars, because the Walk of Fame is, there are stars on the street, on the sidewalk, stars for its enforcers and its informers, but none for those on whom they informed. So, you know, I know you, like, for example, Elia Kazan, describe what the blacklist was.
Basically, in the 30s and the 40s, there was a wave of socialism and communism that was growing in the artistic community, and people were, you know, it was a different kind of communism that would find that than what would ultimately come out of the Soviet Union and Red China in the 40s and the 50s. But there were a number of people, Lucille Ball Desiarnaz, Elia Kazan, um, Trumbo, writers, directors, actors who would go to meetings and were looking for, I guess, a certain level of civil purpose and making the country a better place. And in its early days, communism seemed, in theory at least, to be something that these artists could get behind. As the movement grew, you had some people that were diehard communists, and you had some people who had flirted with it and then got away from it. But after World War II and the Cold War started to develop between the United States, Russia, and Communist China, what ended up happening is the idea of infiltrators, communist infiltrators in the American media, um, in the world of American media, were going out of their way to warp the minds of young Americans and pull them over to that side. And a young Senator, Joseph McCarthy, basically made his fame by creating these witch hunts that would go after people and say, are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Now, this is all a very simplified version of it
Sure.
because, you know, but the gist of it is congressional hearings were set up and the major studios and artists said, fuck you, we're not going to talk about this. We're Americans, we have the right to assemble, we have the right to free speech. But it's a testament to the fear and the fear that can be created and the power that corporations and government have to shape a society. So what ended up happening was the government, with this bullying pulpit, started coming down and started talking about un-American activity, and thus was created the House Un-American Activities Committee. And they started going after different artists who had attended communist meetings, who had flirted with the idea of it. And in a lot of cases, they were told, you can testify and we will allow you to have a career. But in doing so, you have to give us information. So you have to rat on everybody. So people like Elia Kazan, Gary Cooper, Ronald Reagan, the various conservative types within the Hollywood industry, they, to some degree, there were problems of consciousness, but in a lot of cases, they said, okay, we will give you names. I'll give you names of friends and co-workers who attended these meetings with me in order to save their own ass. And then there were certain people like Abraham Polinsky, I think his name was, Douglas Trumbull, uh, Jacques, Jules Dessin, who said "fuck you," and they were blacklisted. They were not allowed to work in the U.S. Some said "fuck it" and went to Europe and became revered, and on much smaller budgets and much smaller films. But Dessin made Rafifi over there. Trumbull. I'm not sure who wrote Spartacus, but that was a blacklisted writer that Kirk Douglas had gone to bat for. It was just a fucked up time, and this is what was happening. So it's really interesting that Anderson makes this commentary, because what he's basically saying is the industry itself is an ugly thing, and the industry defines the city in a lot of ways, but the city is more than that. But it's like you really need to pay attention to the history and the effects that the industry had on artists and working people's lives, for the sheer fact of exercising their American rights, their freedoms, their freedom to assemble, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, that kind of thing. And I like that moment in the film, and he doesn't go far enough with it. He doesn't really dig into it. I thought that was my biggest disappointment in this film, is that you start down paths that you don't go deep enough into.
Question of focus. Like, what are you gonna like? He'll spend a lot of time on architecture and like modernist homes, and like go into like background on that. And I mean, like, I do that. You know what I mean? Like, I do that in this. I go into some fucking deep thing, and then it's like, okay, or you'll go into some fucking story, like story time, and it's like it happened.
Well, yeah, but I was thinking about this. Because I figured this would come up, and I was trying to come up with an idea around it, and trying to explain, basically excusing us and fucking him. But and basically excusing us for doing it, but saying it's a problem for him. And the angle that I realized is that he's working on a film that he is compiling over a long period of time, and is editing, adding, taking away from, shaping into a certain documentary narrative. What we do is different. What we do is a conversation that is organic, that is going in the direction that a conversation will go. One of the things that I like about this show is that, yes, we're watching films, we're coming up with ideas, we're taking notes, we're trying to pinpoint things that we want to talk about and we want to address in regards to the film that we're watching. Certain points that we feel need to be made, but it's an organic conversation that is in a way unwieldy, that is in a weird way. It's gonna be wherever our fancies take us. So you could call that a cop-out, you can call that an excuse, but I think it's more of a description of what we do as being different from this film. This is a film that took years to make. We're doing this episode in real time.
This is true. I agree. I do think that there are elements of it that are the same, and that we each have an agenda. In terms of like, our mutual agenda is to talk to you people out there as we talk to each other. But you're coming to a film or from a film with a specific take that may or may not be the same as mine. More often than not, they're not the same.
They're not the same.
And so each of us there is like a sense of like this kind of, I need this person to understand where I'm coming from. And not only that, like, there are things that each of us want to make sure that we get out
Mm-hmm.
because we want these points to be expressed.
Sure.
And so it's like, it becomes against the wind, you know, it becomes what to leave in and deadlines and commitments, what to leave in and what to leave out. And I think in that sense, we face the same problem, or I mean, if you want to think of it as a problem, but it's kind of like, yeah, like what, it's a question of focus. And so even now we've gone into this tangent about that's bigger than what the documentary is. It's like documentary making, podcast making, conversation making, you know what I mean? And so, so we're both right.
Well, I think, you know,
no, I mean, it's, he did what he did, and he made the choices he made, you know what I mean? And to bring it back to the Hollywood Walk of Fame, it's like, to Andersen, he didn't go into it far, like deeply enough maybe, but it's a big deal because it's like the stars that we see on the sidewalk, many of them bear the names of people who informed on other people. Yeah. And those people who were informed on, there is no mark of them. There is no recognition of anything.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, and if you go to a Hollywood and Vine, another fucking like landmark, it's like maybe that's going to be associated with prostitution. You know what I mean? And we'll get into that next week. And so that he doesn't bring that up, but it's just there's an interesting. I mean, because I also felt that there were a lot of maybe darker elements of LA that he didn't go into, because I think his perspective is more like left wing, like talking about public history, talking about public space. It's a certain kind of perspective. When we get into some James Ellroy shit for this month, because I'm doing a very specific type of LA. Look at LA. That isn't it isn't fucking Disneyland.
Well, it's not the beach. I mean, it's weird. It's not, you know, I was thinking about the films that you chose, and they're seedier, they're darker, they're
very seedy.
Yeah, they're pornographic and alcoholic, and they're dangerous. They're not the sunshiny. They're not Santa Monica. They're not Maui. They're not this. LA exists. What people know about LA, in the same way that what people know about Paris or what they know about New York, if you've never been there, and for the most part, most people haven't, they know from the movies. They know from what they see here, how it's photographed, what it looks like, the feeling. You interpret a place based on what you're told about it rather than experiencing it full on. You can say that about any of the great cities: Chicago, San Francisco, Tokyo. You're seeing the neon. You're seeing, and LA is interesting because so much of it is, you know, little Tokyo is like a little bastardized version of Japan. You know, but not. Yeah, you know, East LA is this weird kind of border town on some streets. Brooklyn, Cesar Chavez, the former Brooklyn Avenue. Yeah, that's a weird little street
But then I'm like, but it's also like, to me, coming from, like, to some people are going to be like, oh, this is like a little Mexico or something like that. But I'm like, no, that's like, up until recently, that was like many generations in Mexican American families. Whereas like Huntington Park, that's gonna be more like a little Mexico. You know what I mean? And someone may not see those distinctions, but someone from here will. You know what I mean? And it's like, you see these different sides. You know, downtown LA has, at one point, downtown LA was just like, when I was a kid, that was a place where ladies would go buy their fabric.
Yeah.
And it was just fucking like, it was just a place to go buy the fancy alleys to go buy like clothes.
Yeah, and that was what, the 80s. So
Yeah,
that was a different
and
time than from when you and I started working down there, because you and I were working down there at around the same time. Um, I did three
yeah, and I've been
years
in and out
parking
of downtown
cars.
for
Yeah,
decades.
yeah,
Yeah.
you know,
Um.
yeah. So it was like, and I've seen LA at all hours of the. I've seen downtown LA at all hours of the day and night. I've worked, I've worked early mornings. I've worked mid shift, and I've worked overnights. It's a weird place. It's a scary place, and for a place to be as big and populated as it is, to be there from 2 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the morning, it's very frightening because it's a ghost town. It's a real. You see the. It's a frightening place. You see the homeless. You see the scurrying. You see the effects of drugs, alcoholism, um, lack of medication. There's parts of me that wonder what it must have been like when Reagan opened up the asylums and just started throwing people out. When the whole period of fuck it, we're not going to
Yeah.
take care of people anymore. I can only imagine what that was like. So, I saw some crazy shit when I was down there, and it's like anything in this world. If you can survive it, then it's great, because it there's stories to be told. There's experiences to be had. Um, LA is like that. LA is fascinating in that regard. Fascinating.
Sure. I mean, in at a certain point, it was all fucking like gangs and fucking, you know, old Broadway, the historic core.
Yeah.
One of the landmarks there that you'll see in movies is the Eastern Columbia building, 9th and Broadway, by the Ace Hotel, the United Artists Theater.
Yeah.
It's all of these old remodeled, and they're still refurbishing stuff, but it's these old theaters, these movie palaces.
Yeah.
And the Bradbury Building from Blade Runner, which we'll get to, it's on Broadway, and on the opposite end of from where the Eastern Columbia Building is. But the Eastern Columbia Building is this Art Deco building with it looks like a jade top, like the tower,
Yeah.
and it has a clock. I think in the trial with Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, that's where they lived at one point. And even recently, it comes up, that building, and it's been in different films. Even if you don't know about it or you can't imagine it, you've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of those movie palaces, at a certain point, were turned into churches.
Yeah.
By the Ace, there's a big sign, Jesus Saves, in red. For a while, that was Dr. Gene Scott, this crazy preacher that used to have this harem of women and all this crazy shit. There were Spanish-speaking churches. Then, in the 2000s, it started to, downtown it was like more gentrification. It became more like hipster. It was, there used to be a lot more foot traffic for a certain period of time. And that's when you and I met, when we were doing theater in downtown also.
Yeah. There would be these art
you go to
walks.
the
There would be, all kinds of
art
craziness.
walks. Yeah, there was a lot of, and Skid Row was right there adjacent.
Yeah.
To Spring, to Maine, but that had a different feel, and there were all these bars. Leslie at that time was living there, like all these yoga places, and it was different, but it was something. And then that started to like change, and then now, like, once you have like the Black Lives Matter stuff, and then like all this like rioting and stuff in downtown, COVID boarded everything up. Skid Row seems like it's expanding.
It's not a surprise.
Because I mean, like, I still work downtown.
Yeah.
And from doing all these different things, and including a lot of theater and rehearsing in different parts of downtown and walking those streets, and there's always, this is something that Thom Andersen doesn't get into, is that, and I think he was trying to stay away from the salaciousness of it, but that's why that leads me more. I'm more to the James Ellroy side of it. Is that like these landmarks? There is a public history, and we'll talk about that. He gets into this aspect of like the narrative wanting to be that there is a secret history, and that's what Hollywood like approaches through nostalgia. But there's also, I see the Hollywood side. I don't just see the Hollywood side, and I don't just see a representation of the industry like Hollywood land as it used to be. I see Peg Entwistle. That's where she killed herself. This like would-be actress. When I see the Vincent Thomas Bridge in San Pedro, that sometimes it comes out like in Heat. I think they incorrectly
St. Thomas
describe it or the thing. Yeah. I'm like, that's where Tony Scott killed himself. The director, Tony Scott, Ridley Scott's brother.
Oh, I thought it was off a cliff. Okay. Yeah, it was off a bridge.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, there are seedy elements to LA that are also missing. But the next point that he gets into is, and this is a picky aspect, is that he goes into LA geography and how Hollywood misrepresents it, because LA is not centralized; it's a series of villages that go together.
Mm-hmm. Well, he talks about the annoying aspect of starting off in one place and then ending up in another place 30 miles away, 30 miles north, 30 miles south. You leave one alley and now you're in a different part of the city, but that's standard for filmmaking. That's just that's just what that is. That you can't that's the convenience of a look. That's the aesthetic of people don't understand how important it is to get the aesthetic correct, because if it doesn't, even if it does exist right next to each other, if it doesn't look right on film, it pulls you out of the film. So I understand the annoying aspect of that. Scorsese talked about that when he was making Taxi Drivers, that Paul Schrader didn't know New York, and he was having the streets and the avenues cross at different places or wrong ways, or it's the kind of thing, it's the kind of meticulous thing that's only going to be a problem for somebody who will allow it to be a problem. Unless it's egregious, unless all of a sudden you're in fucking Chicago. You know what I mean? It's like the Public Enemy is, that's not Chicago. That doesn't look like Chicago. It doesn't even, resemble it in any way. But they were doing that for a number of years when Vancouver was sitting in for New York, because nobody could afford to shoot in New York anymore. It's fucking obvious that New York doesn't have mountains. It's that kind of thing. So,
to me, it's like, look, if there's a restaurant scene and a bank scene, and I happen to know that the restaurant is in Beverly Hills and the bank is downtown, I personally don't give a fuck about seeing them, let's say, drive down Wilshire all the way fucking from one to the other. Like, I'm working on a book that's fucking like, where I'm using using downtown, using LA, and using some locations, and the locations are not near each other, but I want both of those locations in the thing, and I'm not gonna fucking like go through every single block or every single thing to get from one point to the other. Like, that's why it's movie magic. You don't show the in between every place, and even if you do, it's kind of like, as an Angelino, if I'm watching whatever movie where it's some chase downtown or whatever, I'm catching glimpses of these corners, and I'm like, oh, that's that corner, or that looks like that corner. But if you're going to be nitpicky about that, that's fine, but it's kind of also like, shut the fuck up.
Well, part of that is like, you remember when we watched The Hidden? You had never seen The Hidden before, right?
Right.
But I don't know of another film that, and it was disappointing that he didn't include that in this film, but The Hidden hit every fucking spot in LA that I knew. Hollywood Boulevard, MacArthur Park, downtown, the fucking the Wilshire, no, Melrose. I mean, there was so
Yeah.
much about
Well, yeah.
yeah, that it was like, wow, I know that spot, and it utilized it well. I think that's a film that should have been included in here because I think that captured LA beautifully. I want to go back to it and watch it again to remind myself
To see
of a
that.
certain
Yeah.
LA, you know?
LA as background.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now we get into LA as the city as character. And for Anderson, it's noir. It's hard boiled LA. And he really talks about how
Yeah.
James M. Cain, the writer of Double Indemnity, Mildred Pierce, Postman Always Rings Twice,
Mm-hmm.
when he teamed up, so that's the literary foundation, but when he teamed up with when Raymond Chandler, who had written The Big Sleep,
Raymond Chandler adapted McCain with Billy Wilder for Double Indemnity.
right?
That's what happened with that. Yeah.
He got together with Billy Wilder to make a screen adaptation of Cain's Double Indemnity as a film, a 1944 film. And Anderson describes it as them creating they made Los Angeles a character, a quote, co-conspirator.
Yeah.
How do you see that as a noir person?
I think it's really interesting because the LA of noir is very different from the reality of LA. It's funny, LA noir, it's always raining and it never rains in LA. It's such a rare thing. When it does, it's torrential. But if you watch LA noirs, the roads are always glistening because it's always right after a rain, and that's a simple reason for that because it looks better on film. It just shoots better,
There's a style thing.
Yeah, there's a style to it. It's like LA is one of the hottest places that I've ever lived. Not as hot as Phoenix, but it's hot. So you're not going to see people in overcoats and trench coats and hats and full-on suits. Maybe they did wear that back then, but
yeah, it's also a different time.
it is a different time. But I would love to see those films where they take that off and you could see the sweat on them. Part of L.A. Confidential, which I'm not sure if he liked or didn't like, but that's a sweaty movie. That's a hot, sweaty movie, and I think it captures L.A. a lot better than he gives it credit for. But that movie, based on Elroy's novel, really leans into the seediness of it. That's a noir. Noir is basically the darkness of the human spirit and our capacity to fuck each other over and do what is necessary in order to gain power and wealth. That's why noir is captivating because it's usually an underdog hero that doesn't want to be doing what he's doing. That's the whole Sam Spade character. That's Marlowe. And the iterations of Marlowe, whether it be Bogart or James Garner or Elliot Gould in one of the later films, there's a hangdog type of character portrayal that is deeply at odds with the sunshiny beach atmosphere, the beautiful weather of LA. I like how noir plays it so that the characters are in contrast to the world that they live in. And part of that is having lived in LA where LA prides itself on its weather. LA prides itself on you being able to wear shorts into November. It's a weird place in that regard. And it's weird that noir has a New York feel that is transported to LA. Do you ever get that feeling? In the noirs that you've watched?
I feel like one of the differences is that noirs have a slow pace in terms of
Yes.
like there's a relaxedness that I think that doesn't exist in New York because New York is typically just faster.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think like there's a relaxed attitude that is different about LA. Even LA at its most west side and most uptight and stuck up is different than a kind of like come on, let's keep this shit moving. I don't have time for bullshit.
Yeah.
New York, which is, these are stereotypes also, but it's like,
Sure.
I think you see most of that anxiety manifested in LA when you're in your car. That's when everyone's like, I don't have fucking time for this shit. Get the fuck out of my way. Fuck you. And then if you look at them the wrong way, they'll shoot you.
Yeah.
I've had relatives come who live outside of LA, and they talk about coming to California, or they'll say that I'm from California. Like we're talking about me, they'll say that I'm from California, and it's like I'm from LA.
And it's a very different thing. Because California
technically yes, but I'm from LA.
But California can be Riverside, it can be Redlands, it can be the Central Valley, it could be Fresno or Bakersfield or South. Yeah, it could be Orange County. LA is a different beast. LA is a different thing, and LA has a certain sexiness to it that is not available in other places. Maybe it is because of the weather. Maybe it is because it's the dream factory and it attracts these people who have these ideas of stardom. I mean, I was certainly one of those people, and I know a lot of the people that I encountered there. It's like people say, there are no native Angelinos. Everybody is from somewhere else. It's an exaggeration, but it is true. But it's an exaggeration. But the thing about it is that it's I don't know what the census is. I don't know what the population is, but a lot of with the exception of you and a few of our friends, everybody that I knew was from somewhere else. But I was in the entertainment industry, so there's only so much you can do. Yeah, I'm part of the exception because there's only so far you can go in your hometown. Everybody ends up in LA or New York, and LA more likely because of if you want to tell jokes, you want to tell jokes.
La La Land,
but it is. It's La La Land. It's the opportunity to be in movies. It's things are changing now, but it's not even changing in there are still people getting off that bus. There are still people picking up Ubers at LA, and you're discovering, you're like, golly, this is a big old city, and before you know it, you're in the valley sucking dick on a fucking there's all kinds of there are millions of stories that end badly.
Next week, but,
yeah. I'm sorry, I forgot. I didn't want to tease that.
I mean, tease it, that's part of it. I mean, it's like that's another thing. Is like you had asked me before. You said, "Do I consider the Valley part of LA?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Yeah, it's like a satellite." You know what I mean?
Sure.
The reason why he didn't include a lot of Valley stuff in this film, he said in an interview, is because the Valley at that time was trying to secede from LA County.
Haven't they always been trying to do that? Haven't they been struggling to do that for years?
I don't know. I mean, maybe, but it's like. Again, yes, I do consider it a satellite, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know, that's the Valley. I don't fucking. I'm more familiar with Greater LA, which is downtown.
Yeah. Downtown, and then but the thing about it is with downtown. Let's map it out. You have East LA.
I'll break it down.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, you want to break it down?
Well, the best I can do. East LA into you cross over the bridge, or you cross over the bridge on one side into like an industrial side of downtown LA into the whole fabric, fruit, toy district, all that
Yeah, there are
shit.
all these districts. There's the arts district. There's a bunch of districts in downtown.
All
and
of that.
downtown itself has fucking like the arts district, Little Tokyo,
But
Chinatown.
and that's what I was saying.
Alvera
On the
Street.
northern end of East LA, you're crossing over into Union Station and Chinatown, and then
But also,
all
once
of
you get
downtown
into
LA.
the northern side of and now we're getting picky again. But
Yeah.
once you get into also like northern East LA, that's when you're into like Monterey Park, and you're getting into more of like.
Well, that's
like
more of
Asian
a
area.
that's yeah. You're getting this is nitpicky. So like Monterey Park, I consider that more like moving into suburbia
The
of
San Gabriel Valley.
the San Gabriel
That's
Valley,
moving towards the
basically.
San Gabriel Valley.
Yeah,
But
I consider like I look at East
and-
LA and East
and
LA
still under Pasadena.
Under Pasadena,
Like,
yeah.
still, yeah.
Whereas
If you go
East
up
LA
Atlantic,
is
you end up on that side.
East LA is like an extension of downtown LA to a degree. Not literally, but it's
different.
It's different, but it's like holding on to that. And East LA, even there's East LA and there's Boyle Heights, which Boyle Heights is a piece of. I never understood what that was, but people had made the differentiation between it. It's like there's Boyle Heights and there's East LA. Boyle Heights is a part of East LA, but it's not. But they're distinctive. They're different. You know.
Because East LA is like a section of Los Angeles.
Yes.
Boyle Heights is a neighborhood in that section.
Okay, there you go.
So like you have different sections like that, and you have East LA. Before was a lot of like generations in. It was Chicano. It was a lot of like Mexican American.
Yeah.
And then you had Southeast LA, which is a bunch of different cities: Southgate, Linwood, Maywood, Cudahy,
Vernon, all that shit. Yeah.
Bell Garden. Vernon is a little bit. Vernon is, but it's also just more industrial.
Yeah, you're right.
That's and that borders like East LA, but that was more like new transplants. I mean, it was a mix of stuff. Bell Gardens was always like it had a lot of like Okie immigration from Oklahoma, and so there's that. There's downtown. Once you go west, you get into like MacArthur Park.
Yeah.
You get into these other areas.
And that's a lot of Salvadorans and Central American transplants, yeah.
You have Koreatown.
Koreatown, yeah.
You start moving more and more west. You go into like Hollywood, you go into Hollywood Hills. Go a little bit further than that, then you get like.
Well, then you got the Strip, and you got Boys Town into Santa Monica, which is high end.
Right, because you got West Hollywood, you got Beverly Hills, you've got Brentwood, you've got all that shit going.
You also got West LA though. You got all that. You
got West LA, Century City, UCLA, all that stuff. Below downtown is basically South Central.
Yeah.
You've got USC, which is in the center of like all of this shit. You have basically just the ghetto.
Yeah.
And then
Watts, Compton, and then
one section of that is Watts, and then you got Compton and all this other shit. And then you go all the way south. You have San Pedro, but in that area, that's the South Bay. So you have like your Torrance, Gardena, all of that stuff, which is a lot of also Asian, but also like Asian American from like a long time ago.
Yeah.
East of San Pedro, you cross the bridge, you're into Long Beach, which is extremely one of the most diverse parts of LA. Long Beach also has like a very gay culture. Like it has a gay like district and subculture that's very different from the gay West Hollywood subculture. So you have also diversity within that.
Yeah.
And you'll hear people talk about like, oh, I'm much more of like a Long Beach gay person than a West Hollywood because like I'm too old for that. I'm chill. I'm whatever.
And then you have the Palm Springs case. So it's like
that's right.
Every culture has its yeah.
That is true. Yeah. And you've got like your Redondo Beach. You have the beach cities. You have Venice, the San Gabriel Valley to the east,
Mm-hmm.
the San Fernando Valley to the northwest. All of this different shit with all kinds of different communities, with all kinds of different ethnic like enclaves,
Yeah.
with all kinds of different freeways, with all kinds of different police forces, the sheriff running all of them, with all kinds of different fucking schemes that everybody's running.
Yeah. All kinds of problems in LA proper, yeah.
And buses and trains running every fucking which way. But if you want to learn LA, and we'll get to this too, because that's kind of like one of the main points of his film, is that ride that shit. But going back to, you know, this surface level fucking description of LA, of greater Los Angeles, and just that snapshot, it's kind of like, well, what does this mean for LA as a character?
Yeah.
I think there is also this element of kind of like, he describes these different villages that grew together as being bound by mutual hostility. And I think he is right to a certain degree about that, because it's like all of the natives that I know, especially that were doing theater, and already we were doing theater, so that was already a little bit different, because it was like thinking that we're better than people who just came here to do movies instead of learning how to act.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what fucks up this town are the out of fucking towners. And we're not talking about fucking like immigrants.
Yeah.
We're talking about fucking assholes coming out here to get famous.
Yeah.
And
let's be specific about that. Not to practice an art form, not to be great at eliciting drama and characters and really understanding something. No, to become famous. Yeah. The cocaine, the women, the fucking limousines, and the look at me kind of aspect. And I think that's the thing that people hate about LA, because that's what they think it solely is. It's a lot of that. It's a lot of LA is that. But when you live there and you experience it, you're either going to go crazy and leave the place disgusted with what it is, or you're gonna see the beauty in it, and then you're gonna yeah.
It's also like, well, if someone were to tell me I didn't like LA, it's all this and it's all that, I'm like, that's that place that you fucking went to. Mm-hmm. You're stupid. You went there. Yeah. I mean, I won't necessarily tell them that they're stupid, but
they are stupid though, because they went to
not for a split second. I will think that, but
think about it though. They went to a place with a bunch of people that were exactly like them. They didn't try to experience something different, or they're not capable of experiencing something different. They're not capable of hey, let me see what this place is about. Let me find out what it actually is. No, I'm gonna try to do the Hollywood sign. I'm gonna go run the canyon with every other asshole. I'm gonna do Runyon every fucking Saturday, or I'm gonna do the Walk of Fame. I'm gonna go up and down. Yeah, well, that's another aspect of it. So,
the car.
Yeah. Well, the car, yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit about this during the Richard Ramirez episode, the Night Stalker episode, about how he was, it was the early days of that, and how they were able to take advantage of the freeway system to commit a murder in one part of town, in Monterey Park, and then get all the way over to Santa Monica in a matter of minutes, and all these different groups.
Especially then, it would have been easier to minutes, and that's another thing. In LA, we don't measure distance in terms of distance; we measure it in terms of time.
Yeah.
And then everything takes a half an hour. That's a lie. Nothing fucking takes a half an hour to get to. It just takes a half an hour to get to the fucking freeway, basically. But it's like, oh, it's a half an hour away. It's a half an hour away, but it's not. That's a lie.
No.
LA is a place of lies. And the weather. A lot of people in LA hate the fucking weather. because because there is a sense of like, why is it fucking Thanksgiving and it's hot as fuck? Isn't it supposed to be autumn? And it always seems to get hotter. Every year it's getting hotter, and it's like, why is it that the people in Orange County don't believe in fucking climate change? Like, it's getting fucking hotter.
Yeah.
They're stupid. Yes, they're at the beach, some of them, but that itself is not only Disneyland and the fucking beach. Orange County can also be...
Well, it's like any place. It has to be inland to a certain point.
And Asian fucking immigrants. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and for a while, everyone thought it was some parts of Orange County were only home invasion robberies. So yeah, you got to get inland somewhere.
Yeah.
But the idea of like all of these varied parts of the city, and then the idea of like the car and with the car, there is a sense of that American sense of freedom, but there's also a sense of like anxiety, I think, in LA with a car, because it's like, where are you going to fucking park?
Yeah.
How far is it? What's the parking situation? Aside from just the crashes, it's like, am I going to get fucking pulled over?
Yeah.
Don't fucking honk at this person, because, you know, that was a thing too. Like I said earlier, but like, if someone didn't have their lights on for a while, it was like, if you flash your lights to let them know their lights are off, they'll fucking shoot you. You know, this anxiety of like taking the wrong turn somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of this kind of like leads to that noir anxiety, that noir, which originally comes from this dark depression era vibe.
Well, I mean, you know, LA was a staple of noir because so much industry in the war effort was in LA. And then the aviation industry took off during the war and after the war. So all these men who had been fighting came back here, and they found themselves in those jobs. So you take the disillusionment of fighting for something that, you know, and coming back with, you know, shell-shocked and post-traumatic stress disorder and, you know, whatever they want to call it then versus now. The role of women who were then working and are now like, oh, now you got to get back into the kitchen because the men are working now. The black migration from the South, people think of a black migration only to Chicago. No, a lot of them moved from there to California, you know. And then you have the long generational history of Mexicans, not Mexican Americans, Mexicans in California from the time that it was Mexico. So, you know, there's all of that. I mean, it's a weird storied history. So you take all of those factors and you it's not even combining them. It's forcing them together in a pressurized cooker. Now the noir couldn't, the noirs couldn't necessarily tackle all of those elements because number one, the studio system wasn't going to allow them to bring race into the picture. You know, you could create the femme fatale character. You could have noble police and corrupt police. But all of that was there. The reality of life informed what was being put on screen. And a lot of times when you watch movies, you can start to break it down and say, oh, that's really what this is about. This is, you know, I just finished reading James Ellroy's The Black Dahlia. And it's shocking to me how much racism. Not to say that Elroy himself is a racist, although I don't know what his politics are in that respect. Yeah, because I'm just getting into some of it, you know.
In a couple of weeks.
Yeah, but Elroy doesn't shy away from the relationships of cops. Yeah, I mean he lives for that shit, and I don't blame them. It's for high drama. It's great. It's this this relationships of blacks shit upon even worse than anybody else, coming back from the war, and what Compton, what Watts, although Compton wasn't, I think it was just Watts that was specifically black, because wasn't Compton like
Yeah,
Polish or something?
these other areas were white.
Yeah,
Um, and and South LA, like Central Avenue was the hub, and that was like there were all these jazz clubs, and there was
yeah,
like this bright African American. It was a community that had, because everyone was there,
yeah,
so you had a diversity within that area because of segregation. And then once there were opportunities to leave, because people could now move and they could be accepted or reluctantly accepted or halfway or however much accepted in other communities, or they could just buy a place or rent a place.
hmm,
Those who could left, and those who couldn't remained.
sure, yeah,
And when you get like the history of LA is like a history of riots. It's a history of like, and that's when we start getting into LA as a subject, because it becomes, as Anderson describes it, like conscious of itself amidst all of these crises. So you have like already an identity crisis because of, LA is a place where there were indigenous people, there were Native Americans
yeah,
here, as there were everywhere. And the Spanish came and claimed it. And so it was California under that. Then Mexico had a revolution against the Spanish, and so it became Mexican. And then, a treaty makes it U.S. territory. Then it becomes the state. Then yada, yada, yada. And you have a series of like different crises happening that are, and you can say this about any city, but we're just talking about this one, are creating the sense of what the town is, what the towns are that will become LA. And so you have, the Zoot Suit riots, and you have these Mexican Americans that are wearing zoot suits. This is post-war with that, and the sailors and all that. Go to watch American Me, watch some of these different films, watch Zoot Suit, which we've talked about.
yeah,
Race riots. Watch the city kick the Mexicans that are living, Legion Park. They can create Dodger Stadium.
yeah.
There's that. There's
Well, that was
the
an interesting
racism of the.
aspect of the film, is that they talk a little bit about Chinatown and how that, but instantly when I saw the Chinatown, I thought Chavez Ravine, and I thought of Bunker Hill, but which he had already talked about with Bunker Hill,
Yeah,
and I thought all three of those stories were deserving of their own documentaries, and not just
yeah,
the stories themselves, but how they're depicted in film. Because if you've ever seen, it's really interesting that if you go back far enough and you go into the 40s, there's a movie called, I think it's called Crisscross, with Burt Lancaster and Yvonne DiCarlo, and a lot of it is set in Bunker Hill. So to see it, and if you've been in that area, you've basically seen the remnants of Bunker Hill. It's
hmm
all completely gone now. It's all raised, but you can imagine what was there. And
yeah. You'll see the car, the funicular that's there, that's been reopened.
hmm,
There's Grand Central Market there.
yeah,
But yeah, it's different. But there are, and that's around there is the financial district, and then the jewelry district nearby, on Hill Street. But it's all that area of downtown is on a slope,
hmm,
um, and there's just layers and layers. There is it's geography is destiny, and there's a psychogeography to it where you can see it's how the city affects your psyche, but it's also as if there's a hauntedness to it, where it's as if you're walking with the ghosts of what were there before, and maybe you can't articulate what it is, and I'm romanticizing it, but I definitely think that there's something to that.
Mm-hmm.
Is you can see the ghosts in the streets. Some of them are invisible and some aren't, and both those that are literally invisible and those that are literally not are also visible. You can see all of these ghosts, invisible or not. You can feel it. You can feel the kind of noir, don't trust anyone because you don't know who to trust. Because it's also like, well, we don't, it's like, what is the thing about if you don't know your history, you're doomed to accept it, that cliche, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, well, LA, what is LA's history? And it goes back to the films that depict it. Oftentimes they're crime films.
Sure.
And like I said, it's so much of, you can mark LA history by its riots or by its conspiracies or by its scandals.
Yeah. Well, I think part of what makes LA interesting and such a beautiful background for noir is the promise that it gives and its inability to live up to that promise. This idea, the dream factory, when in reality,
dreams, right?
Yeah,
it's like Vegas in that sense.
Oh, it's worse than Vegas because you already know that Vegas is bullshit. You know that Vegas shouldn't be out there. It shouldn't exist. And only a fool goes out there and thinks, people win all the time in Vegas.
Built Vegas and came to LA to die.
Yeah, it's it's fascinating how that works.
To be murdered.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot about this. There's a lot about this documentary that I love. And I have to watch it again in order to get the full picture of what it gets wrong, because I think what it does is you're excited whether you understand it or not whether you understand it or you don't while you're watching it. Part of the fascination is that it digs using the clips of films that you've never seen and some films that you do know. It stimulates these memories in your head of watching those films. It gets exciting in that way, but it also stimulates this, especially for those of us who spent so much time in LA, you being born there, me spending 20 years there. It stimulates this this sense of nostalgia. So yeah. I'm not sure how successful the movie itself is in the thesis that it's trying to support, this idea of plot, background, and character. Well, I think it fails in a certain sense in that regard. I think it could have been done better in that. But
he talks about going into background, character, and subject. He gets into the idea of nostalgia. Mm-hmm. He describes it as depicted as a city with no real history, and so often it's either shown in the past or in the future.
That's a good point.
And he describes it. He describes nostalgia as always being the dominant note of the city's image of itself. Mm-hmm. And I experienced this all the time. It's like it becomes Blade Runner-esque, where it's like, is this your memory or is this the memory of a film that you watched?
Yeah.
Is this somewhere that you've been, or is this somewhere that you saw in a film before you went there? Shit like that. In that aspect, he splits films between the future one is the obvious one, which we'll get to, but it's like in the past, he talks about in a nostalgic LA of the past, there's a nostalgia for what might have been, but what was somehow stolen. And I think that's kind of like touching on what you describe, is that like LA has this allure that it doesn't really ever pay off. And what I mentioned earlier is that in a city that supposedly has no history, which it does, but through Hollywood, not Hollywood the place, but Hollywood the industry, that search for a history becomes a search for a secret history at the expense of a public history. Mm-hmm. And so you see these films like Chinatown, LA Confidential, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which are all noirish, that are located in Los Angeles, but are all based around crime and around some kind of corruption. And the corruption is real, but it has to become Hollywoodized. Even it's not good enough to have its own, like a documentary corruption. It has to be something else. So where the corruption might be a little bit more mundane, you have to throw in a femme fatale into the mix, you know what I mean, just to spice it up. And with that, he throws in the subsidiary theme of the struggle to get around LA without a car. In Chinatown, you know, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is all about the freeways. And he goes into like Sunset Boulevard, you know, like the main character.
Yeah.
Without a car, he'll die, you know? These are the past LAs. The future LA obviously being Blade Runner, where it's a nostalgia for what he describes as a dystopian vision of a future that's become outdated.
Yeah.
So at that point, you get into like the subject of hauntology, this nostalgia for futures that never were. And you see that in the neo-noir of Blade Runner with the Bradbury Building, with Union Station. And that's deeply connected with, again, crime. It's like films about LA are somehow either about sex, the industry, or crime and cops. And he asks, like, can there be a movie about Los Angeles that doesn't involve the police?
Yes. Charles Burnett made a film in the late 90s called To Sleep with Anger. And it's about a black family, middle-class black family living in South Central Los Angeles in a nice little suburb neighborhood. And they get visited by a friend from their past, Danny Glover. And it's how he disrupts the family. His very presence from the old country, basically, Mississippi. And it's a fascinating little film. That's why, like, it doesn't happen too often, but Charles Burnett, I'm not sure if it's Burnett or Barnett, I can't remember exactly, but he profiles his one film, Killer of Sheep, at the end of the movie. And I saw Killer of Sheep at I think I saw it at the New Art, and I was really blown away because it was subtle, it was slow, it took its time, and it depicted, you know, I'm sorry to say, but it
realist LA.
Yeah. But it wasn't Menace to Society. It wasn't Boys in the Hood. And I understand how ignorant it is to say that.
That's not neo-realist, but...
no, but you understand what I'm saying is that the ignorance on my part and most of the audience is to say, well, where are the gangs? Where are the drugs?
Yeah, where are the black people killing each other?
Exactly, you know, because this is all we get from these filmmakers, and instead you're seeing Killer of Sheep, which is just children playing and a man trying to provide for his family. To Sleep with Anger, that basically that same area 20 years later, it's beautiful, and it's not about the violence, it's not about crime. There's not a scene where cops are harassing a family. It's just people living, and it's interesting that those are the only two films that I can cite that do that. There are no everything else. Yeah, I mean, and it proves his point. It really does prove his point.
Yeah. I mean, he says that we're more obsessed with the police than people in other cities.
Yeah.
And I mean, LA with Parker, we've talked about this. We talked about it in our Straight Outta Compton like years ago.
Yeah.
Go to the fucking archives. Go to the fucking archives.
Just
There's
punch
a
in
lot of
LA
shit there that
riots
you don't know
on,
about.
yeah.
There's shit that you guys don't even know that we've talked about on there.
Whole lot of shit on there.
And the racism with LA police didn't start with Rodney King.
No.
If for those of you who fucking remember even what that is, you know what I mean? Like, obviously our audience is of a certain age and a certain demographic, but so most of you do. But at this point, it's like you have to say that. At this point, it's like, well, Rodney King was blah blah. You know what I mean? And
well, that's the thing, that to today's youth, Rodney King is the past. Rodney King is history. It's not
it is the past.
It's not our past. It was our reality. It's in our past, but it's not our past. It's our reality. It's where everything stems from. It's our, if you want to be literal, past in history, yes, but it's something that we lived through and knew and were watching by the television set. You were there. I was over here, and we were experiencing how that would affect everything afterwards. I'm sure there was a certain level of tension.
Talk about the OJ thing too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Had OJ been found guilty, there would have been another riot.
Most likely, yeah.
Probably. And people can say, people were saying that in high school, and I'm not saying, I trust the wisdom of fucking high schoolers. It's just that, no, it was just like, this was the fucking, like, there was such a sense of relief and such a sense of, it was literally like this sigh when it was like, because to some people it's like, well, an entitled celebrity wife beater killed his wife.
Yeah.
And a man who was on the scene, whatever that meant, right? When Tarantino does his version of that story, they will be avenged, right? After he shows them getting the shit kicked out of him.
Yeah.
But it's like, to some people that was what that was. To other people, it's like, here's another black guy potentially on the end of that rope over the death of a white woman.
Yeah.
Like that's and the riots were like, this was like on a Friday and the riots were on Wednesday. You know what I mean? Like if years were days. And so like, and the thing is that it was just another fucking headline up to the next one to come. And we were all glued to those trials and all that stuff. And we were all, and with the fires, with the riots, you could smell the fires in the air.
Yeah.
And it gave it this crazy, quite beautiful glow, which was just kind of like eerie, but that's what it was. And to see everybody fucking taking shit. And you're watching TV, watching people take TVs. And it became like this weird commercial.
Yeah.
It's like a commercial for that particular TV set, because it's like, everyone's taking that fucking TV. That's the one, you know what I mean? Like, that's the one to buy. But this is LA. And then he gets beyond that, the cop, because then he goes through all of these different like versions of different types of cops in LA. He's just throwing all these clips at you just to make his point. And then he gets into kind of like his sense of nostalgia for LA, which is the neo-realist LA of like, the Killer of Sheep and The Exile.
Mm-hmm.
Native Americans from Arizona who are exiled, basically they come out to LA and they're living in Bunker Hill, and it looks like it's a film from the early 60s, and it just looks like a different time. And it's different. It's not the LA of Rebel Without a Cause, which is post-war, brighter,
Mm-hmm.
what he describes as the first teenage noir that is almost a parody of noir itself, but really focuses so much on the car. Or Kiss Me Deadly, which he describes as like, it's at the mid-50s, like realist LA in terms of like the shot before when they got in the car and they turned that corner is actually there. So
Yeah.
it's like, he gave it his stamp of approval. Because already he's coming from a place of like, I want an LA of realism, not an LA of, and I think that's why he stayed away from the salacious, because like it's more Hollywood. Even though there is a Hollywood version of the salacious, but there's also a real version of the salacious that is flesh and bones.
Yeah.
It's one thing to tell a story about John Belushi dying at the Chateau Marmont. It's another thing to pick up his body there. And so he asks at the end of the film, he says, like, who knows the city? Only those who walk, only those who ride the bus.
Yeah.
And I was a long time without a car here in LA, riding those fucking buses and trains. And I have nostalgia for that too.
Well, I'll tell you, there was a certain freedom. I know it sounds backwards, but there was a certain freedom when I gave up my car and started taking the bus and started taking the train to places. And it was out of I don't want to deal with the shit anymore. I don't want to deal with the traffic. I just want to go to a place. And you do get to know the city better. And it's funny. I did that in LA. I wouldn't do that here.
Why not? What's the difference?
The transit system out here is fucked up in a way that you can't. I can't comment on it without sounding like an elitist fuck. I mean, it's rough. The places that you have to pick up a train out here, it's number one, it's inconvenient, and number two, it's not. They're not the nicest, cleanest, safest places.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and that's, LA is expanding its metro system, and it's like doing a lot. It's been working on that for a long time now, but
Yeah.
it's I mean, you'll see crazy shit, but you will also, like, when you get on the freeway, it's like, okay, when you watch a movie, you're only seeing what they're showing you, which are the highlights. It's like going on social media.
Yeah.
Like, you're only seeing the fucking highlights and maybe some fucking even the idea of no filter is a filter at this point, because that's a contrived version of, like, I'm giving you my fucking realism, but I'm taking the shot. It's not like someone took a candid shot of me.
Yeah.
And so there's that. But break it down from there to, you're going on the freeway, you're going from point A to point B. You're not sightseeing. You're just getting on the fucking freeway so you can basically end up somewhere else.
Yeah.
And honking your way or cutting people off or whatever you're needing to do on the way there. And yes, in LA, unless it's posted, you can make a right turn on a red light. When you're on the bus, you can shut down your environment to a degree, but never the way you can when you're in your car, because in your car, you can, for the most part, just look straight and, you're checking your mirrors and all that bullshit that, like, you're supposed to do. But how many people just drive fucking with their eyes straight?
And that's the point. That's what I'm saying.
And
it's
the
like,
car is the rule, is the world. Yeah. When you're on the bus, you can read a book, you can be on your phone, whatever you want to do. But when you're shoulder to shoulder with someone and you're you have to have your wits about. You have to be eyes open.
No, you have to be
You
aware of your
learn the stops.
environment.
You learn
And
the streets.
yeah,
You learn the corners. Yeah.
it's like you and I talked about this a lot. It's like when I was in downtown, I never had headphones on. I never walked through downtown
Fuck
with
no.
headphones on.
Of
You're an
course,
asshole
you're
if you
asking
do
for it
that.
at that point.
Yeah.
And I'm not blaming the victim. I'm not putting it like that. But
No,
I mean, you're
but
asking for it in terms of like you're fucking
mhm.
opening yourself up to some dumb shit.
Yeah, you're making
Um.
yourself a target. Whether you want to
Yes.
believe that you are or you're not, you are making yourself a target, and you are complicit in whatever happens. It's not that's not it's not your fault. You didn't ask for it, but goddamn it, there's a level of responsibility that you have to take because it's your life. And yeah, it's L.A. L.A. is a weird place. It's a I don't know. It's a dangerous place, but it's not. It's comfortable, but it's not. It's it's such a But I guess I don't know. You could say the same thing about New York and Chicago and San Francisco. It just depends on where you're at.
It depends on the fucking neighborhood. It
Yeah,
depends on the street, on the whatever.
yeah,
And so LA Plays itself is one particular person's take on the presentation and the representation of the city.
yeah,
The city is still more than what he describes. The city, because it's like there's the simulacrum of LA, which is the LA that we see in cinema, and then there are the multiple real LAs that we experience in life.
Well, that's the thing. That's the problem with this film, and I admire him tackling it. But it's like going to paint the Great Wall of China with one fucking brush and one can of paint. You're not gonna. You can't. It's too fucking big, and and he's not even focusing on one aspect of it. He's focusing on multiple aspects of it, and I enjoyed a lot of it, but I feel like it gets a short shift. I enjoy the experience of watching it. I like that it introduced a couple of new films to me and things that I want to see,
Yeah,
especially those the there were like three black oriented films at the end outside of Killer of Sheep that I was like, I'd never heard of that. God, I want to see that. There was something about, you remember
yeah,
the guy driving past the old Goodyear factory?
yeah,
I don't think that was Killer
yeah.
of
And then I
Sheep.
mean,
It was, yeah,
like down in southeast side, it's Firestone, and it's because
hmm
that was touched the tires. You know what I mean? And it's like these different places that they mean different things. And Amelia Earhart fucking practicing her flights down here. You know what I mean? Or
yeah,
just different aspects of things that you wouldn't necessarily think of as being LA.
yeah,
Or you think of like Howard Hughes, maybe you think of him involved in like Hollywood, but you don't think, I mean, maybe you do, it depends. But like, Hollywood would lead you to believe that it's Hollywood Howard Hughes versus like, Spruce Goose Howard Hughes. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
And so there's so much, and it's like, is it a question of like that stupid song "I Love L.A."? And it's like, well, I do love L.A., but I also hate L.A. Like,
Yeah.
um, because there's an ambivalence.
hmm
Um, I think New Yorkers are like fucking love New York. I love New York as a non-New Yorker.
Yeah.
I don't. I have more of a clear feeling about New York than I do about LA. Because the very nature, there's also a chauvinism in saying that, because I'm about to tell you how special LA is, because I
Yeah.
can have that mixed feeling about it, that love-hate fucking sensation towards my city, because my city is like none other. I
But
mean,
there's
anyone
something
can
to
have that for their fucking, even Podunk town.
there's something to be said though, is that you can't really love or hate a place until you actually live there. You have to live within it. Like I can't even say that I love or hate Chicago because I never lived in Chicago. I lived in Evanston. I visited Chicago. There's a big difference, you know?
All you can do is limit it to whatever your experience is, and you can say, well,
Mm-hmm.
you can talk about some great love that you had in your life. Maybe you didn't marry her.
Yeah.
Maybe you weren't even together. Maybe it was just maybe it was, a love affair.
Yeah, maybe it was a before sunset kind of thing. Maybe it was, the potential of what it might have been. You build that
Right.
shit up in
And
your
that's
head too. So,
and that's going back to that aspect of the nostalgia is
hmm,
like, in a sense, LA is kind of like always the one that got away, because
yeah,
it's kind of like it's the one you got that got away, but it's also the one you ended up with in a weird way. Um, and it's like, I think I've seen that a lot with people who came out to LA, who the LA that they wanted to come to is the one that got away. And then the part of LA where they ended up meeting us, um, not on the west side, but doing fucking theater in downtown or in
hmm,
Little Tokyo, or that's the one they ended up with. And the one they ended up with was so much more meaningful and so much more like a place that they could have like a center with.
yeah.
Um, but there was always that call of what could have been. And there was always kind of that, like, damn, you know?
Well, I'll tell you this much: I had my foot in both of those waters. Um, Not successful in either, but both of those waters, and I saw. And I will honestly say that the more fulfilling artistically was the one that paid less and had less of a future, and you felt like you were actually doing something, you know?
Yeah. The other one was just, was all hype.
The other one was all hype and you telling yourself, this is the job that I need to do in order to get the job that I want. But it's hard enough
Yeah.
getting the
I
fucking
mean,
job you don't even want. It's hard to get that job. And that's the problem. LA LA is like a beautiful woman you can't fuck. It's just it's there. You attend to it, you can look at it, you can
you
admire it,
attend to it.
but you're not going to get it. You're not going to. Very few people get it.
But again, there is the LA that you do get.
Yeah,
Um, that that like listens to your bullshit.
there's something
Um,
about being able to recognize what the reality is versus the dream, and understanding that,
well,
yeah, the reality isn't a bad thing.
that's when you that's when you realize that that's the actual thing.
Yeah,
Is the other one is not. There's Hollywood a place,
yeah,
and there's Hollywood an idea, and there are parts of Hollywood the place that are fucking scary and seedy and go to yucca,
yeah.
and whatever. But there are parts of Hollywood that are, even though, like, regardless of how played out or how whatever, they are still cool.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the reality. The dream, the love affair, the whatever. It's like the one you end up with, the place you end up at, shows you like, oh, this is so much deeper than that tourist trap bullshit that I was chasing.
Yeah. I believe that.
And
Yeah.
I think that's really what he was trying to get to in this film. And I was just like, I've been just watching it with the volume down, just watching these clips, just
Yeah.
watching these scenes, and a lot of these movies I've never even fucking heard of, which is the point. And it's just kind of like, oh, that looks interesting. That looks fucking cool.
Sure.
Oh shit, that's a different LA. even a different LA than the different LAs that you know what I mean? Like, so it for me, that's the point of kind of this. When I, at the beginning of this episode, said that I was going to do an LA quintet and to do a different LA. Well, first, just the LA quintet aspect, people are thinking, and then you come in and he makes that point, you're thinking about movies with LA in the title.
Yeah.
To Live and Die in LA.
LA Takedown.
LA Confidential.
LA,
yeah. And on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And already people hearing that are coming out with different kind of, they're going to say, well, like, what are these most iconic films about LA? What are these, what are they going to talk about? What are we going to watch? We're not going to talk about iconic films in this round. We're just going to talk about street corners. We're going to talk about vibes. And I'm interested in how people a lot of times may get a taste for LA. And so, as I said, the first taste for people who aren't from here, or even, I mean, it's kind of like this parallel taste. You grow up here, and before you can actually, you're old enough to go to these places, you're actually also, like as I described earlier, you're going through the TV, you're going through the movies.
Mm-hmm.
So the first layer is the layer of Hollywood, the layer of cinema.
Yeah.
And so as a cautionary tale, it's like, okay, this is LA, but it's not LA. Keep your wits about you. Keep your fucking wits about you.
That's what'll keep you alive.
He describes, he quotes Polanski, you know, to give a spin on, to put an interesting stamp on it is like, think of all that Polanski did, failed to do, was done to him, all of it. The seediness, the tragedy, the scandal of Roman Polanski's history. Describing Los Angeles, saying there's no more beautiful city in the world provided it's seen by night and from a distance.
That says a lot.
It does. So keep your fucking wits about you. buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos. This week, thanks to Charles Mahoney. Buy a coffee, tell a friend, tune in, and watch this.
We'll be back next week, folks. Bye-bye.